what we'll do with this is probably going to graze it. And we have another one on that side hill. That's another cover crop where you see the bales on top of that hill. And then the oats we're going to combine for grain.
Going to cut it straight, Mike?
Cut it straight, yep.
When will you graze the cover crop, Mike?
When will you graze it? Probably in November.
Okay. You've grazed cover crops before. You've actually weaned calves on cover crops a little bit.
Yeah, at the place. Yeah, that's what we've done.
Want to talk about that a little bit?
What we do, how we wean, we put them in the corral for 3 days, wean them, and then turn them right back out on the 8-acre sorghum sedan cover crop. And our sickness has gone down quite a bit doing it that way. Anything you want to?
We put the whole herd out here in one group then?
This will have the cows on it probably around 300 and cows will be on here.
You have water out here then?
Yeah, there's a tank about halfway up.
Repeat the question, Mike.
Is there a tank out here? We have one probably about halfway up.
It's a frost-free tank.
Yep. And that line is from the yard. We pipeline. Yep. Deep pipeline.
7 foot.
Yeah.
Do you graze it standing or swath it?
Standing.
Have you done swath grazing?
Repeat the question.
Have we done swath grazing? No. We've had better luck when it's standing than letting them. And then there's still some there for the catch snow.
What's the benefit of swath grazing or leaving it? I think it'd be better to graze it like this because you're covering more area, right? Rather than.
I was going to come to that. Let's see if there's any other questions for Mike. Other questions for Mike? Okay, so I had asked about whether he was going to graze it standing or swath. There's advantages to both that we can talk about. Mike mentioned leaving it standing to catch snow. Your manure distribution might be better standing, might not be. The advantages for swathing is you can put it into a swath while it's still green, and you can lock in a lot more nutritional value if you swath it rather than leaving it standing. With it left standing, the plants are going to be more mature. But the big thing is the loss. If you have particularly a warm season mix out here, warm season cover crop, and it dries out, gets brittle, you can't have some breakdown of leaves, drops to the ground, doesn't get cleaned up. If you swath it, you pretty well lock that into one place, it gets cleaned up. What you lose potentially is holding snow. Now, swathing does not have to be at 2 inches. I have seen a lot of these fields where they're swathing it, leaving, an 8, even 10-inch stubble. But, if your sorghum sedan gets this tall, leaving an 8 to 10-inch stubble is one thing. If this is all the taller it's going to get, leaving an 8 to 10-inch stubble, isn't the same sort of result. So part of it depends on where your crop is. But if you left that taller stubble, you would trap more snow.
Thing to consider too, Jim, is when that material, if you leave it standing and that material, and you do have some material that breaks off, goes to the soil surface, that would only be a positive.
Okay.
What was the comment?
The comment is, well, if people would tighten up the circle, you might catch the comments a little better. So let's tighten up the circle. Jay was talking about if you do have leaf shattering that falls to the soil surface, well, that could only be a positive. And I'll come back and say, Well, what's your primary objective of the cover crop? If your primary objective of the cover crop is soil building and improving soil, then it's nothing but a positive. If your primary objective is feeding these X number of livestock through the winter, and you're looking at it more as a feed resource, you might want to have that little additional feed in there. You know, we can talk about it both directions.
Yeah, I would see that we'd want to feed both herds.
That's what we're trying to do.
The one
Yeah,
above
feed
and
both
the one
herds.
below. We
Yeah.
got to feed them both.
Yep.
And that's one negative thing about bringing in the swath. It just gets too clean further away from the swath, and it's too clean removal. I mean, that's just observation of what we've gone down this road on. Whereas if we can bring 50% of this to the soil surface, either in trample or break off, then we see a good response in crop production the following year.
Yeah, why weren't you saying all of that through the microphone? He's saying it's a good thing.
Because I'd like
on
you
the
to
distribution.
repeat it so you don't forget it.
Okay. They're trying to feed both herds, above ground and below ground. Grazing on the standing crop, better distribution of debris, manure. It's a wonderful thing. Another reason why we might want to put it into the swath is if you are in deeper snow country and you are trying to economically feed the above ground herd. Because in Saskatchewan, they talk about the cows grazing through foot and a half of snow on a standing stockpiled forage, and they talk about grazing through 3 feet of snow when it is in a swath, because all the cattle have to do is find the swath and then they move through the snow and eat it. And if you are swath grazing, that's why we always run our strip graze fences perpendicular to the swaths rather than parallel with them. Because if you are grazing in deep snow, each time you're moving that through there, you're exposing ends of grazed swaths.
Mike mentioned on the first stop, I think it was, that he could not have cover crops year-round. Can we talk about that a little more in terms of that means to me that he needs to build soil health more than provide animal nutrition? Can we talk about that?
Okay, the question was, at the first field, Mike said he couldn't use cover crops year-round, and the suggestion was he needs to improve his soil more to be able to do that. So why don't you talk about broadening the season, pros and cons of what you could do with cover crops here?
The first year that we did the cover crop, we did it right after we combined the oats, and we put a cover crop in, and then we put the cows in there. It got probably about 8 inches tall, and they went in, and it was like chocolate. They just cleaned it like a pool table. So then we went, 2 years later? Then we went to a full season. We're trying to get more cover on to this ground of ours. Feed the soil.
One thing we find too, and when we put a cover crop in, these soils, these outwash sands are maybe going to hold anywhere from 5 to 6.5 inches of water. 6.5 would probably be the highest that Mike would have, and they're probably over on much closer to 4.5 to 5 inches of water per 4 foot of profile.
Okay.
So for every 4 foot in your water budget. When I get into the loams in this county, if I get to Minokan Farm and I get on the loams there, I can hold 9 inches of water in a 4 foot profile. So part of it's water budget, part of it's finding the fit, because we can empty out a 5 inches of water in a 4 foot profile very quickly. So we also set up the recharge, so we have those scenarios. But I think there's others that have used cover crops in this group and have some similar soil types who have probably found some similar things that find the fit. In this particular ranch, Tom had went to full seasons because that worked, because we had the water budget to do that. That part worked, but it's finding the fit. Also, if you have a very small plant, you still have most of the impact under the soil. so you're building soil aggregates and you're giving off carbon exudates. And so you get the big impact under the soil, but there isn't a big plant on top. And so when you have that small of biomass on top, are the livestock going to have a short duration there? Yeah, absolutely. But just to kind of share kind of what we're at on soil types here in terms of these sands, pretty low water budget. But
I know a couple of people who do quite a lot of swath grazing, and I've had the same question for both of them. One of them, some of you probably know, Phil Gerda, the Buffalo guy over near Buffalo, South Dakota. And Phil says he manages for fat, dumb, and lazy, and I wandered around with him a little bit, and I said, well, you're neither fat nor dumb, and I said, I'm doubting the lazy part. And then he gave me more reasons to believe that he wasn't lazy either. But he bale grazes bison. And when I was there, it was in the dead of winter, and he was that day moving them from one paddock to another. And I said, why bale graze? They're buffalo. And he was just baling and leaving the bale sit. And in the pastures that I saw, he had actually gone in a second year, and with the swather had dodged the previous year's bales and laid the second year of bales there, and then grazed those both in one winter. And then he wasn't going to bale graze there for a few years. He was going to summer graze. And I said, why are you doing this? And he said, I get a lot more ADAs, animal days per acre. So what he was using was much higher percentage of the plant he was putting through the animal. I have a friend at 7,200 feet elevation, Saratoga, Wyoming, and he's doing an awful lot of swath grazing, not bale grazing, but swath grazing. They have wind, and he says if I double windrows, and he says I do, I have to double them before they're completely dry, or the wind will raise havoc with them. If I can double them when they're still a little damp, they'll tie to each other, and then I know which direction the winds usually blow from, and so I always lay the windrows into the wind. No matter how inconvenient that might be for the machine, we try to lay the windrows into the wind. Same question to him. Why this rather than just letting the cows graze? More animal days per acre. And he was good at looking at a stand of feed out there and estimating the tonnage he would get if he were to bale it, or if he were to lay it in the swath, and he could convert animal days to tonnage. And he was getting really good at that. And he said, if I can't get at least 3/4 of a ton, and preferably a ton, to lay in a swath, I can't afford to swath it. And so anything lighter than that, he grazed standing, and then he grazed the swaths. So the question I asked both of them, I said, well, okay, if I come back 10 years from now, I want you to be able to tell me, for soil health, which did a better job? Converting a lot of that to manure and then letting that go to the soil, or laying the actual plant material on the soil surface. And I think there's a pretty big question surrounding that in my mind anyway. What's going to drive soil health better? I think the question though of animal days per acre, I think that's undeniable. I think those guys have probably both looked at it closely enough to know.
Oh, you go ahead. I've been there already.
We've done some cover crop interseeding on perennial pastures, and we just direct drilled it right into dormant Kentucky 31 fescue. And it did. My main concern was it would even come up. And so we grazed it. Right behind the graze, we came in with the drill. And we drilled it, a 9-way species, and it just absolutely took off. And I thought it was going to kill my fescue. It got so tall. I mean, it was up here about my chest. And folks, the biggest mistake I made on that cover crop was my cows liked it so well that I took too much of it. And so I would warn anybody that's going to do cover crop with grazing, you do need to leave some out there for your soil. Don't let the cows and they will. We had cows doing what Jay's doing right there. They were pulling the whole darn plant out. You can adjust how much they take by how big an area you give them and how fast you move them. So don't go in there and wipe it clean. You're trying to put some carbon on the land. You grew it. Now don't let the animals take it all. Ian has a saying that says sometimes there's actually more benefit to putting some of this on the land than it is to run it through the gut of a cow. I think he may be right. So
on this piece of land here, how would you do that? I mean, what if you brought your cows in here? What would you do? Are you going to cross fence this?
I would start at the water source. Where's your water at? Wherever the water's at, I would just start at my water source and I would start strip grazing away from that water source. If you were concerned about them regrazing, you might have to use a back fence to keep them off of what they were on. But I would poly it. I'd use all poly.
And then take this crop here. How much of it do you take before you move them?
Probably 50%. If you're trying to build soil. Yep.
There's your 50.
Yep.
So if you lay it on your hand, you can find the balance. So you have your eye before you move the cattle in.
Yep.
So I like to clip off a few of the different species. I lay them on my hand. I look at where the balance is, and I got a real good idea.
Yep. They'll eat it all. They'll eat every darn inch of it. And they'll pull it up by the roots.
Couple of comments. This one you might have to think about. All right. Utilization pays your operating costs. Residual pays your overheads. Think about that.
Say that again.
Utilization pays your operating costs. Residual pays your overheads. Operating costs are short term. Those are bills you got to pay. So this question of how much do you utilize? A lot of it depends on where you are in the stage of ranch development, what your solvency is. If you have short-term bills that you've got to pay because you're in building phase, your herd expansion phase, you're probably going to utilize more because you've got to generate the ADAs because that's what pays the bills. The residual is what builds the soil. And in the long term, you have to pay your overheads. You do, and Burke might dispute me here, I'm not sure, you don't have to pay your overheads every year. If you have a plan of how you're going to cover all your overheads, you can let them slide for a year or two, but eventually they have to be paid. It's what you leave behind that's building the soil, that's going to ultimately raise your carrying capacity, that is going to spread your overheads over more production units and ultimately pay that. So keep that one in mind. And then the other one is relative to that question of how do you take a field like this and budget it out effectively. I like moving cattle first thing. If I'm doing it once a day, I move them first thing in the morning. Most of the grazing, 60% plus of the dry matter consumption that a cow or a sheep is going to do, but more specifically with cows, is going to happen in the first 3 hours of the morning, from a little before sunrise to a couple hours after sunrise. 60% of their consumption is going to take place then. So if I'm strip grazing, moving each morning, I look out there late in the afternoon. If the majority of the cattle, say 80% of them, are on the area that I gave them that morning, and there's just a handful scattered back, you know, between water, picking around, they're telling me that the best bite of feed in the pasture is in what I gave them this morning. If I look out there late afternoon and 30, 40, 50% of the animals are on the area that had been previously grazed, they're saying I didn't give them enough to eat. And that's when you're going to lose your residual cover. And if you're managing for soil building and you want to leave 40% behind, 50% behind, whatever you're trying to leave behind, that's a way that you can track it. So if they're back picking on where they've already been, tomorrow you give them a bigger strip. Jay, you have something else you want to say?
I think you're on the road. Something just kind of spinning off of what I've heard you say before, Jim. I think I've heard you say the statement of you have to waste some grass to build some grass, or something similar in there. Yeah.
Grass feeds the grass, grass feeds the soil, then grass will feed the livestock. But you have to start with the priority of feeding the grass first, which will feed the soil, which eventually will feed the livestock. I think that's what you heard me
Yeah,
say.
I think it was something, yes, I think so. I think it's pretty similar on a cover crop when you're gonna graze a cover crop. Cause I think we have to find the balance. I think we have to find the balance and, you know, as to how much you're gonna take. If you're in a dire straits in terms of grazing and you need that extra week or two off that cover crop, you're probably gonna take a little extra. On the other hand, if you can balance it out for the below and above ground herd, I think that's really positive. Last summer, Mike, I think we had a discussion on one of the hayland fields about, because we're in this D3 drought last year, and then the question kind of became, should you take it? Should you take that one? And I think our conversation was, if it's the deal breaker for the herd, by all means, we're going to take it. If it's something that I don't need for the herd, it's maybe not a 1-year dry spell, and we have to have some resiliency for the following year. So there's always, I think there's a balance in there. I think it's how we do that.
I think Jim made a really nice comment about the economics. The thing I would say about the overheads, and it makes a difference between one of you people and another, is the overheads are in our fixed equipment, right? Our equipment and our people and things like that. And a lot of times our overheads are, at the bank, they're paid for. But for another one, they're not paid for. You've got to meet that annual payment. Those of you who have those overheads paid for, and you don't have to worry about it very much until one of them wears out and you have to replace it, that builds you some really nice flexibility. Because, you know, the overheads ultimately have to be paid for, but oftentimes they don't have to be paid for right now.
This is a complete different subject, but I'm going to cover it because somebody asked me on the wagon. That guy in the cowboy hat back there, it's his fault. But he said, you know, if you had a higher, you know, a bigger frame herd, how would you get, what's the most economical way to get down to a more maybe balanced size animal that would fit your environment? And I said, well, I want to talk about that, but let's talk about it in front of the crowd. And so what we did is we started out with 1,400-pound cows. But I started scurrying around the country trying to find the smallest frame grass genetic bulls that I could get my hands on. And over time, keeping the daughters out of that first cross, the best ones, and putting them right back in the herd. And so I wouldn't go out and sell my cows. I mean, if I had cows that, you know, you kind of like them, maybe you got a few of them named, whatever. Don't go out and sell your cows.
Don't name them.
You've already got them paid. Maybe you've already got them paid for, and you go buy something else that may be worse than what you got. Get a smaller frame bull and start working your way toward that. And you'll be surprised. In 3 to 4 years, you're going to take a lot of pounds off those replacement heifers just by using a smaller frame bull. If any of y'all want to add anything to that or tell me I'm crazy?
I'd certainly stick with the cows you got. A lot of those cows are working, you know, and it's not hard for a cow to be bigger than I want, again, because of the relationships we've pointed out and talked about. But I know what I've got, and I don't know what I might get if I go out and buy some. So
Yeah.
start where you are and, you know, just work your way to a size that makes sense.
Can you talk a little bit about the frame of a bull that you would look for to put? Let's just use Mike's cows. Let's say I get that herd. Thanks, Mike. What kind of bull are we looking to put on his cows?
Well, it depends on how rapidly you want to correct and how much, but I'd probably look for a frame 3 bull, and most people can't even stand to think about a frame 3 bull, but that's probably where I'd go. Hey, and a frame 3 bull can easily weigh 1,500 pounds, easily.
Them are the ones at the end of the sale.
I know. The other ways, maybe the ones you ought to buy, you get them a little cheaper. But seriously though, if you want to change the cows, and I'd look for pretty small frame bulls to begin with, and I don't know. Once I start getting where the cows are breeding real good and everything else, with minimal supplementation, and very strategically timed, then I don't know how loud I dare say this, but then I start keeping some of my own bulls.
You can say that loud as you want.
Yeah, I start making some of my own bulls because my cows for my management are probably as good a cows as I can get.
Yeah.
And I can buy semen from the same bulls all the rest of those guys out there can. Or I can buy a bull or two and, you know, and mix them in from the same source as anybody else can. And so if I've got as good a cows as there are for my environment, for my management, why would I, you know, over time, why would I not produce some of my own bulls? And I've been doing that for 40 years, and I wouldn't switch today.
What size are your cows? I mean, we saw the younger ones here. Your mature
Like
cows,
the-
what size do you think they are?
Like those red tag ones you see.
Yeah.
That's what the rest of the herd is.
How old were?
Those are 3-year-olds, 4.
Okay, cows reach mature proportions at 4 or 5 years of age, so they're probably not quite there yet. That 10 and 15, do you think?
Those would
oh,
be
sorry.
right there. Right there, what you looked at. That's what the rest of the herd looks like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask the question just a little different way. If at the end of calving season you've got some dry cows, you thought they were pregnant but they didn't have a calf, and if you sell that dry cow at the end of calving season, which is for you in August, what will that cow weigh?
Probably 12.
No, that's not a huge cow then.
12 to 13.
Okay, and at preg check time, you got open cows, she's just weaned a calf, and if you sell an open cow then, what will she weigh?
Probably around that 11.
Okay.
And then if we sold those that we just looked at, those are probably around 900 to 1,000. You're lucky if you're going to get 1,000.
Okay.
I have nothing to say.
When you go through your heifers that you're going to keep in the fall, if you got one in there that's 100 pounds heavier than the rest of them, that's a good one to eat, not to put in your herd, because she's going toward bigger is better. And if you keep that heifer and breed her, and then she has a bull calf, and you keep that bull calf as a breeder, you're just getting bigger and bigger. So nature is always about uniformity, average, and so the extremes are always kicked out. And so don't be chasing extremes. That's a big one. We used to keep 2 herd bulls, and now we're using as many as 30 to 40 bulls. And so we're letting all the yearlings have a crack at it. And, you know, I got this from Ian. Ian's doing 700 bulls on about 4,000 cows. I'm like, what in the world are you doing? I'm not a very good cattleman, but I can pick out your best 200. He goes, no. He said, let nature sort it out. So nature, the bulls that have the highest testosterone, highest sperm count, those are the ones that settle the cows and get to pass on their genes. The wimpy bulls, they don't get to pass on their genes. And it's kind of that way, you know, in white-tailed deer, the massive buck is not going to let a forkhorn come up there and breed his does. And so the average is always better. And we've seen that in our calf crop now. We don't have the extremes anymore. We have a whole lot more uniformity. The other thing on a bull, don't keep him past he's 2 to 3 years old. That's it. Get rid of him. He's worth some money. If you let a bull get old and big, what are you going to do with him? Sell him at the sale barn? Let somebody else use him. I mean, we're selling 2 and 3 year old bulls, and they're just selling like hotcakes at a state fair because they're still worth something. Don't let them get great big and over, you know, too big and their legs go out or whatever. Sell the bull. If he's a good bull, this was my thing. You know, I had one, his name was Big Red.
Don't name your bull.
Yep, he was Big Red. I won't tell you what the other one's names was because there's girls in the crowd, but the other had another one. And he says, you need to sell Big Red. I'm like, no, I love Big Red. He said, Big Red's a good bull. He's got a son out there as good as he is or better. And Big Red's standing underneath the shade tree. His sons are doing all the breeding. Sell him. I'm like, okay. So I did. Take the money while they're still worth something. Folks, you can raise better bulls than you can buy. And I'm serious. And I'm a stud seller. I'm going to tell you straight up, you can raise better ones than you can buy. You know why? Because Because the time that cow's inseminated and is raising a baby calf inside her, it's being fed your soil. It's being fed your forage. It's already adapted. When that thing's born, it's already adapted to your farm. You go buy an outside bull, he may never adapt. So save the money, keep it in your pocket, raise your own bulls.
I think we're gonna call that a wrap, folks.
I have one more question.
all
One more
right.
question.
Only because, well, never mind.
Can you touch a little bit on the braided wire you use and the reel that you use? Because
All right, I'm going to tell you what I use, and I want to pass it to Jim because, Jim's company, American Grazing Lands
Services.
they sell this stuff.
Only the best.
I'm going to tell you what I use, and we use the PowerFlex Poly Braid. Okay, it's got the 9 steel filaments in it. We use the geared reels. There's several different kinds out there. I've settled on the Terragate because it has a better locking mechanisms. Because I'm going across the pasture, I'm honking. I may be doing 20 mile an hour. I can't take a chance of that stopper falling down. I've never had a Terragate stop fall down. I have had O'Brien's. They'll fall down, and now you've got 2 pieces of wire. The other post we like is the O'Brien Step In. Awesome post. I love those. I don't break the snaps off on them. There's a lot of look-alike posts out there. And they also have the tiny little steel bar on the bottom that you can stick in frozen ground or hard ground. One other thing, when you get those posts, the O'Brien, sharpen them. They don't come sharpened. Sit down and get your grinder and put a pencil point on the end of them. You will save your feet from breaking off because you will break it on a hard frozen morning or in a severe drought. You'll break that off. The pigtails. I use pigtails only on corners. I don't like carrying them across the paddock because they slide in my arms. But I know other people that love pigtails. High tensile wire, get good wire. 170,000 PSI. If you get the higher, I made the mistake. I bought some 200,000 and they had a sale on it. It was cheap. It was cheap for a reason. You couldn't roll it up on a reel without it snapping and breaking. So don't get the really high tensile wire. I have trouble with that. Post, keep steel out of your system if you can. You've got steel post out here and you're trying to do high tensile wire all the way around your farm. If a deer hits it, knocks that insulator off and it comes flying back, what have you got?
The cold fence.
A cold fence. Do you have time to walk your ranch every night to find out the short? No. So if you're starting from scratch, you either use fiberglass, timeless, one of those other type fences that are not conductive. Don't put steel out there. And if you've got an old fence and you run a new fence beside it, take the time to roll the wire up. I've made that mistake. And I mean, when you got a short and a deer comes by and hits that wire and carries it up on your new fence, you've got to go find that spot. So just take time to roll up the old wire and get it out of there. Okay? Let Jim cover a little bit of that.
Power braid or PowerFlex's poly braid. That's the only one we sell. We've tried the other braided materials and none of them stand up to the quality of the PowerFlex. Oh, is that what you said, PowerFlex Power Braid? Yeah. We sell a lot of Terragate reels. We also sell O'Brien, Gallagher, Stay Fix. For the money, to me the Terragate reel is the best reel out there. And one of the things I concur 100%, the locking mechanism, that thing will not fall down and jerk your arm. We've been using the O'Brien step-in post since 1987. I have 20-year-old posts that on a 0-degree morning, I can take and bend end to end, let it go, and it comes back up. There's no other post we found that has anywhere near the durability of the true O'Brien. There are the knockoffs, none of the knockoffs that look just like an O'Brien post to begin to compare to it. So exactly what Greg is using, we have the same recommendations, and those are the products that we happily sell. Go to our website, AmericanGrazingLands.com.
One more.
And it can be there.
What about for your high tensile fence? What do you suppose for that?
Okay, here's where I'm going to differ with Greg. We, in the West, where we have big game pressure, we only use at least 200,000 psi wire. The 170,000, the elk just pop it like a string. So we use,
Because of
in
the
the
elk?
Midwest, we sell 180,000 psi wire. In the big game West, we sell 200,000 psi wire. For line posts on that, I like the PowerFlex G2, which is a hollow plastic post. The Pasture Pro, which is a wood plastic fiber, is great. In Missouri, we use oil-filled fiberglass sucker rod exclusively. It has no flexibility. The elk and moose just pull, a whole line of fiberglass posts. They won't break our wire, but they'll pull all the fiberglass posts out of the ground. The G2 and the PowerFlex stay in the ground a lot better.
One other thing I wanted to cover was the chargers. There is a really good charger out there, and I love Stafix. Stafix is a great charger. I don't have any problem with Gallagher. But this Cyclops charger they've got now, it's being made in the United States. I've got several of them. They're about a 25% roughly the cost of a Stafix for the same number of joules. So to give you an example, a 36 joule Stafix is going to run you $1,300 with the remote. You can buy a Cyclops for about $875, and they're one heck of a charger. I haven't had any trouble with mine. We get lightning strikes.
Same website?
I don't know. Do you carry Cyclops?
I do not do product sales. I'm not sure if we sell Cyclops or not.
He should. It's a really good charger, and guess what, folks? It's made in the United States, so hooray for USA made.